All right, let's bring in Pat Vellner. Pat, thank you so much for doing this today, man. How you doing?
No problem. Doing well, guys. How are you?
We're doing great. First thing I wanted to ask you about is this. You go into a season now where there's actually going to be some known structure, and it's a little more what you're used to in the under the old regionals model. How does that now affect the way that you will train and get yourself through the season?
What a concept, right? We got a little bit of clarity on where we're going to be. I think a lot of it depends on, what your level is and what your expected goal is. Given what the open looks like now, and taking 10% out of that open pool, advancing into the online quarterfinal, and then the way the quarterfinal breaks down and sends you to semifinals, it depends on the continent you take part in, how many people are going to advance out of that, right? So for me, competing in North America, the open and the quarterfinal don't hold as much weight as maybe like a regional or like the open used to, because I just need to be top 10% in the open, and then I just need to be maybe top 150 in North America, which probably isn't a super tall order for me. So I can kind of cater my training around that and say, okay, maybe I'm going to be preparing more for what the semifinal might look like, rather than preparing for what the tests in an open context or an online quarterfinal might look like. Not to say that like I'm going to sandbag the open and the quarterfinal, but you can kind of have a look and navigate it based on what your ability level is. What's cool about the quarterfinal context is it really provides a new middle ground for people who are trying to grow in the sport and advance to the next stage. Like I've got friends who aren't elite level competitors, but are competitive, good athletes. And they might fall into that top 5 to 15% of athletes in the open. And, now these people have something to say, okay, well, I'm going to push through the open, and then I get this next stage where I'm going to train at, and they may not expect to advance out of that, but that's their next big stage. Right. So it provides another cool middle ground where, we can start to develop more athletes and give people a very linear track where they can say, all right, I'm training for this now. And that is a good way to keep people motivated and on track. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah. And speaking of being on track, we spoke with you during our trials broadcast not too long ago. And, you're on the path back from an injury that you sustained from training in the lead up to the games. How's that going? And what, is it I can imagine it's maybe a sigh of relief a little bit, knowing that you don't have to be as dialed in during the open and maybe be on a little bit more reasonable path as far as rehab goes early on in the season.
I think for a lot of people, I probably fall into the same situation. I know, actually, I was thinking about this the other day. Someone like Annie Thor's daughter is a great example, right? Who's recovering from a pregnancy. If I had to go all in for the open, it might be really hard to get there, but knowing you've got a little more wiggle room is, it's good. It's good physically for me to be able to come back and do that, but it's also kind of a good mental break to say, okay, I don't need to stress. I can kind of relax a little bit and be more careful. I'm in a good position now. I'm starting to get back to things, but I need time to get back to fighting shape, right? Like I've been doing a lot more controlled movement, a little bit lower intensity, trying to get all the stability back and build that foundation. But, I just started doing some more open style training, and I actually redid 20.5 yesterday. And boy, like it was really hard. So I've got a little bit of a road ahead still to get back to, where I want to be for certain things, but it's nice to know that I've got the time to do it.
The old system, and when I mean the old system, the sanctional system that we just went through, afforded you guys kind of a choose your own adventure path of when you wanted to peak and where you wanted to compete. And now you have more structure. And I'm curious, which do you prefer and why?
It's kind of funny. I can see the value in both, right? I know I think from a coaching perspective, I think it's easier to do the new kind of look or the regionals type look that's very linear, because you can plan those peaks really intelligently and more easily. And you can do it for a large group. Like if I'm a coach who wants to have a program that brings people through and say, okay, I've got like my regional level athlete, my game level athlete, my open level athlete, whatever it is. There's like some continuity there and everybody's on the same timeline. Whereas if I have one athlete peaking here, another one peaking here, another peaking there, it's a lot more work. And I think that it's nice to have that. For me, I know it will be beneficial for something like competing at the games. In the last couple of years with a changed format, it's great. You get cool opportunities as an athlete to travel, have really cool experiences, compete for big prize purses, but it's easy to get greedy and get like caught up doing a lot of things, right? Because it's hard to say no to some opportunities. You know, somebody rings you up and says like, hey, do you want to come to Brazil and do this or that? It's like, yeah, of course I do. But now you got to weigh out, is it worth it in the long run? And sometimes those are hard decisions to make. So in some senses, having the decision preordained for you is actually kind of nice. I think we'll see in a system like that, maybe some athletes that we saw in the past have really strong performances at the games start to come back to life. And you might see less injuries and things like that because there's less people running down their system and then having to compete at a high level event like the games when they don't have the choice. So I kind of, I love the opportunities that come with the sanctional system, and I'm glad that there's some of those travel opportunities are still going to exist, but I like kind of structure, right? So I don't mind this one bit.
Yeah, I was going to say it's interesting to hear you say that too, because if you go and look at some of the payouts, you were second on the men in earnings from prize purses last year, despite not making it into the top 5, and partially because that the competition system of yesteryear, I guess, for sanctional allowed a little bit of a diversity in that regard. But outside of, I guess, defending your Wadapalooza title for a third straight year, what are your thoughts on this side pot season that seems to be kind of formulating a little bit outside of the competition season? Do you think that will be enough to provide some financial incentive for some of these athletes that are looking to really be professionals?
I think it definitely will. I know those ideas are still percolating a little bit, and we gotta wait and see what actually comes out of it. I had heard some of the early plans on it, but things, we're dealing with so many different moving parts that these plans kind of change and adapt over time. I'll be curious to see what that looks like in the long run, and as well as other things, like what is the sponsorship situation at the games look like, as well as prize purses, et cetera. Like, is it something that if you're trying to earn a living as an athlete, is it something that you almost have to take part in? Or is it something that is, really an optional exposure piece or a little bit extra income? Because it depends, and it'll affect the way people make that decision. If you go in and you commit to doing another 2 or 3 competitions between, September and January, and then you've got to do the open, and then you've got to go back to the quarterfinals, semifinals, games. You really, now you've gotten rid of the off season that new structured look, new/old structured look provides. So I think there's some details that need to come out on that still, but that's certainly a big part of it, and again, it's enticing from a lot of different reasons, financially, of course, and from an opportunity building perspective, brand building, partnerships, all that stuff. There's a lot of different pieces that go into that and that are important parts when you're trying to, be an athlete and earn a living and earn an income as a competitor. So I hope that there's a lot of opportunities for people to get into that stream who aren't necessarily, like, you don't have to be a top 20 games athlete, then all of those people go into this system. Because I think that if there is both going on and there's, a question as to whether you want to put your body through that, there's going to be a lot of opportunities for, up and coming athletes to get really great exposure, really great competition opportunities and experiences, and kind of have this sort of training and proving ground in that stream as well. So yeah, I'm hoping it's not super exclusive, and I'm hopeful something comes there, but we'll have to see what the level of commitment looks like, because if it means that by doing that, you've now committed to doing like 7 competitions in a season, that's a lot. Like, I did 5, I think, last year, and I got hurt.
So how do you determine where that sweet spot is? Because obviously you want to get through the game season, and that's going to require you to compete. If you count the open, quarterfinals, semifinals, so that's 3, and then an in-person qualifying event, so 4, and the games is 5. How do you determine how much is too much for you then in the off season, so you can have an opportunity to make money but not kill yourself?
Yeah, I think it's, everyone's appetite for that is a little bit different. And you got to make sure that, your eyes aren't bigger than your stomach as well, right? So there's some things that have to go into it. One being, unfortunately, age. I think some of the younger athletes might actually be able to just go full board and do some awesome things. But I think that you have to start to be realistic and play it safe in some context. One of the good things that, being a North American athlete and knowing that there's more access from that quarterfinal to semifinal, I maybe don't have to factor in the open and quarterfinal as heavily as maybe someone who is in a continent that has less spots available. So, there's some areas where, if I decide to do a couple competitions in that off season area, it might be okay because I can afford to save a little bit of that training in January, February. But I think those are just conversations you have to have with your coaches, and you have to be as objective as you can and try to look at it personally as far as what you need and what you're trying to get out of it. Because yeah, it's certainly enticing, and I have the FOMO always, and I want to do all the stuff. So it's hard to then just decide like, no, I can't do this because it's it's going to cost me something more in the long term. And I hope that we see the decisions get made in a way that doesn't put so much pressure on the athletes to make those decisions, because I think that more often than not, the athletes will make the wrong decisions. And like, in all honesty, I think that, the mindset and the type of people who are competing at that level, they're more than willing to push themselves into those situations. So unless we govern them a little bit, I think that there's a high potential or high risk that you're going to have a lot of people biting off more than they can chew, and then you potentially deal with injuries or short careers or something like that as a runoff. So I that's kind of where my head's at, is like, I hope the opportunities exist there, but maybe we reduce the volume of some of those competitions and they're not 12 events anymore or whatever, so that we can sort of maintain the longevity and health of some of these athletes, especially up and coming guys who we want to have 8, 10, 12-year careers. I think as we get smarter in the sport, careers are getting longer, and some decisions there, like if I was 20 years old and they said, oh, you can go to do all these different competitions and have all these opportunities, I'd probably go for it, and then I might cut my career short.
Yeah, it's funny because you like hearing you say that, and that's essentially what in these other sports the players associations are tasked with. And I know you've been involved with the PFAA a little bit, and I feel like the chatter and the news coming out of that has been relatively mild from that standpoint. Is that something that you feel could be a bigger burden that an organization like the PFA can kind of tackle and improve upon moving forward?
Yeah, it's been one of our top, like, we kind of have had three major components that we want to take care of, and athlete safety is one of the biggest ones, and that kind of comes in a lot of different shapes, but things like that is certainly something that we've brought to the attention of CrossFit, and we've tried to just keep that in their ear when the whole restructuring was going on, and saying, okay, well, when we're going to create a new system, what sort of things do we need to look at that are going to provide ample opportunities for athletes, sponsors, event organizers, everybody to earn income and earn a living in this space, but also isn't going to put people in vulnerable situations where there's liable to be issues, and also, as well as things like at competitions, what is a safe amount of maybe volume for certain movements, or what is a safe height to do a rope climb to, or whatever. There's a lot of different issues, but that volume piece, in terms of volume in a year, is actually pretty important, and making sure that we're not just driving these athletes into the ground and they're not being treated as cannon fodder that is super replaceable. Like, it's fine, we have a stud like Justin Medeiros come up and say, there's this young guy who's got a bright future, like, let's ride him hard for 3 years and then he's going to be hurt, we'll throw him in the shed. Like, we want to avoid situations like that from happening, right? So we've tried to sort of, it's a slow process, and this year especially, where things are still a little bit turbulent and there's a lot of murkiness to navigate right now in terms of like the COVID issues and all kinds of stuff. So some of that stuff is being less headline grabbing, but we're definitely staying on top of it so that when we settle into a comfortable system that we feel is good for the future, hopefully we've had our our thoughts at least acknowledged and met to some degree with all that stuff. And it's something that we think that the athletes can have long careers in.
What's the exchange been like with CrossFit between the PFAA or the athletes in general and the powers that be over there? Because that's something I think just a concept that people are still just trying to wrap their head around, the fact that HQ is actually listening to the athletes. What's that been like?
It's been good. Like, I think lately they've been very open. Like, we've been able to participate in a lot of conversations surrounding the sports side specifically, right? Like, we're not going to pretend that we're going to try to take control of CrossFit Inc. in various degrees. Like, I don't know anything about the affiliate side. I don't know anything about the training side. But the athletes that have been around for a long time and have competed in the circuit for a long time and done competitions all over the world run by different organizations, we're sort of the experts in that field. Like, as much as the person who organizes the event thinks they might know the best all the time, like, we're the ones who feel the effects of that. Like, none of those people did the workouts, and none of them got to like experience whether it's like the heat or the weather issues or the volume accumulation or whatever. There's so many different factors that go into the programming and the running of a competition, and we're the ones who feel that athlete experience. So when it comes to things like trying to figure out which events are going to go into the semifinals, like we've a lot of us have competed at a number of those events, and so CrossFit's been very good at asking for feedback to say, hey, like, what did you think about all these different competitions? Like, what are the key pieces that you guys think are the most important for athlete experience? Like, what are the, where are things that you feel like needs are not being met? Where have things been good? And so it's been a lot of just idea sharing and information sharing for right now. And like, I think long term, our goal is to create some framework that, if you want to start a competition, you can look at and say, okay, like, these are the things that make a successful competition. And if you can meet, all of these criteria, then you're pretty much all but guaranteed to have a good event. So it's been cool. Like, I think that it's nice to just have the starting point where we're in the room, we're having those conversations, and, they're listening to us. And it's slowly coming around. Like, I think initially we were a bit skeptical even of how much our voices would be heard or respected. But it's been great. And I think, with the new leadership there and the way the games team has kind of shifted, we've been pleasantly surprised. And I think that in our minds, there's always work to do. And hopefully that's how they feel as well. Like, the product's never completely finished. If you think you've got it perfect, then you're not willing to grow anymore, and that's a problem. So I think that that's kind of where we stand on this thing is, we're picky, I will say that, but we're always kind of looking for like, what's the next way to improve this product and make it better for the next people coming along. So, we feel like we've got a lot of valuable input, and it's nice to see that they're starting to kind of lean on us for the areas that we feel like we are experts in.
Right on. And as far as life outside of competing, I know it's been a crazy for everyone. It's been 2020 was kind of a crazy year, but you're one of the few athletes that maintains a full-time profession outside of competing. I know you and Michele have made a lot of changes in the last year, moving, starting new jobs, things like that. How has life outside of competing been for you? Given all the changes, the pandemic, and everything like that.
It's been pretty boring lately.
Mm-hmm.
Canada's backtracked a little bit, and operating in the health world as well. My partner Michele is a family doctor, and I work in a clinic as a chiropractor. So we're pretty high exposure people. So in general, we try to kind of keep ourselves distant. Like, we're not going out for dinner regularly or doing things, because I think that that's kind of our responsibility as people who have a high exposure risk.
Yeah.
So, we've been boring. Like, it's been a little bit of a sheltered life. I've been really fortunate that since we moved at the end of end of July, early August, we got kind of a bigger space, and I was able to build a training area at home. So I've been able to do a lot of my training here, and it's been kind of nice. Fortunately for us, our lives haven't changed that much. We've been able to both work still. I've been able to still train. It looks a little different, but that's okay. We have been able to kind of operate pretty normally other than our social lives. So frankly, we count ourselves quite lucky. And I've always it was the same when I was at school, and this now the same with work, but it's nice to have a way to kind of walk into another world, where I can get away from CrossFit and training and all that stuff, and stop thinking about that and go do something where it really occupies 100% of my time and I have to focus on something else entirely. And then, when I go into the gym, I can focus on that completely and kind of forget all the cases at work and things that I've been dealing with in the day. So I find that for me is a really healthy balance. Like, that's sort of my like work hobby balance, if you want to think, but CrossFit is my hobby, oddly enough to say on a CrossFit update show. But that's sort of how I divide things. And so I can't live half in one and half in the other. I've got to completely put the other hat on and then do the same thing the other direction. So it's been good. It keeps me fresh and it keeps me kind of focused on what I'm doing at the time. Yeah, so it's been good. It's been busy though. I know Michelle's been working in rural communities and things like that, so she's been away a fair amount, and so it's been tough. I spend a lot of time indoors and probably watch more Netflix than I should.
Hey, there's a lot of good stuff coming out pretty soon, so I think you'll be all right. But
perfect.
I'm interested. You mentioned that CrossFit is a hobby, right? And I mean, basically from the time you burst on the scene, we've seen you go through school, start your profession as a chiropractor and as a practitioner. And I'm just kind of curious, has that always been the case for you? Have you always been able to like mentally segment that accordingly and keep it in those silos? Because I feel like, the community might hear that and might think, man, could you imagine if he actually, what would it be like if you viewed this as your profession, as your primary focus? It sounds crazy to think for someone that has 3 CrossFit Games medals around his neck that, it's a hobby.
Yeah. And that's what I don't want to misrepresent. Like, I kind of say that because I feel like my chiropractic is my like mainstream profession, something that's more traditionally considered a profession. But certainly my career as an athlete is like, it takes a lot of time. I think that divide is something I kind of developed out of necessity at school, where I really had fairly strict timelines and deadlines and demands that I had to meet. And I was trying to really pack a lot in a day. So I just I made the time and I split things very clearly. And I had to do both things completely separately in order to do them well. And it allowed me, that sort of learning to do that taught me how to work really efficiently and effectively in what I was doing at the time and kind of maximize my hours. So I tried to really carry that on once I left school, and it's just sort of how I think of things now. I like compartmentalize a lot, and I chunk my time into very specific areas. So it's not that I don't treat my CrossFit career as seriously as I should. It's kind of the opposite. Like, when I am doing CrossFit things, they occupy 100% of my attention. And that's sort of the divide, is like, when I go to work, I don't think about CrossFit. I don't talk about CrossFit. Occasionally when patients ask, because some of them know who I am, but like, I try to put on my therapist hat and exist in that world and do that job as well as I can. And then when I leave and I'm in the gym, I'm focused on doing that. And I try to have no distractions. And so, yeah, like, I mean, does it mean that if I wasn't working, I'd have like extra 3 hours a day to have a nap? Like, probably, but I've never really like done that. So I don't know that it would be beneficial for me. And I've always kind of thought of it like, if I had extra time, I would just waste more time. And I kind of like, if I just had an extra 3 hours a day to sit at home and do nothing, that's probably what I would do. Like, should I be doing a bunch of mobility for those 3 hours? Yeah, maybe, probably, but I honestly don't know if I would, because it's hard to stay on one thing for that long. I vote for myself. like if I can go into the gym and do a 2-hour hard training session, I can stay focused for those 2 hours. If I start getting to 3, like I'm starting to drag my feet around. And so if I was just had like an extra like 6-hour block in the day that was all training, I don't think I would do 6 hours of training. Is basically how it is. So yeah, I think it's just a way that I think and compartmentalize my time. I certainly do both as well as I can do them. But yeah, that's sort of as best as I can explain it. It's not that it's like a hobby, like, oh, I don't take it seriously. It's just that that's kind of how it started. And so knowing that it won't be my career when I'm 50, 60, I just like, I kind of look at my other career as more of my job. And then this as more of something that is sweet that I get to do. It's an awesome career. But athletic careers can unfortunately be a little bit fickle as well. So I think maybe it's a little bit of a defense as well, where I don't, let's say I did like get hurt seriously or something like that and everything, I wasn't able to do it anymore. It'd be awesome. I'd still be involved in the CrossFit community, but I wouldn't have a career as an athlete, and that's okay.
Yeah.
There is this growing trend for athletes to kind of relocate to be closer to their coaches. Now, you and your coach, Michele Letendre, are on opposite sides of the country right now. How does that dynamic work for you when you're both in different areas?
I text her a lot. Maybe I'll try to get her to move out here. I basically blow up her phone a lot. Most of the time I have my programming kind of for roughly like a few days in advance, like I might have 3 or 4 days out. So usually the time that change is a little weird because I don't know exactly what she's doing and if she's coaching and whatever. It's been great during the pandemic because I have a little more access to her because she's not out and about doing things as often. But usually all it is like I dome some stuff. I ask her a lot of questions, usually the day before. So I know specifically what we're looking to do on every part of training for the next day. And then when I get up, I can just sort of roll through the day. I know what the instructions are. She leaves pretty good instructions on the programming as well. And then when I'm done, I'll give her some feedback and I can send videos of any of the lifting or any of the stuff like that. And I think it really helps that I've worked with her for a long time. So we know each other. I know what her cues are. I know what she needs in certain areas of what she wants. So if she gives me a certain type of instruction that might not mean something to someone who had never worked with her, or maybe they would have 5 follow-up questions, I know exactly what it means and I can just move on with it. So I think having that level of experience together is valuable when it comes to having to do that. Obviously I would love to just be able to have my own private coach that's just standing next to me every day while I'm training. I think eyes on and instant feedback is super valuable. And I have had that with her at times. So I think having had that, I can kind of carry some of that forward. So I know what she means. I know what she's saying. I know what she expects, and we're able to go long periods of time apart without needing that. But yeah, I mean, I'm jealous. It's nice when you can do that. But again, obviously decisions I've made in my life, I can't exactly pick up and move somewhere. And I have a whole other life and career and other things here. So fortunately we've had a lot of time together to polish all that stuff. And I think that we kind of know where we're at. So it's nice. I'll work on her. Maybe I'll get her out here.
A couple more just questions for you. And one I wanted to ask you about Michele in particular, and that is, it's very rare that a good athlete, someone who had a good athletic career in a sport, whatever sport it is good at coaching, but she has managed to do that. What makes her such a good coach?
It's funny. I think that she's the way she thinks and her mindset is, and she's really into the psychology of coaching. I think Michele she worked with a lot of different coaches in her career. And I think she kind of had some things that she liked, some things she didn't like, some approaches that she sort of assimilated a lot of information, and kind of created her own style. But in doing that, I think she recognized that as an athlete, certain coaches' styles didn't mesh with her well and some did, and whatever. So she understands that there's not one way to coach. and that certain athletes' needs are very different, and that an elite level coach has to be able to meet an athlete where they're at, and like to a certain degree, like it's funny, like it's almost like therapy in some ways. Like you really need to be able to work with your athletes, like, and understand, meet them where they're at emotionally, physically, like work to goals together and come up with goals together and all that stuff. So she's done a lot of work, like, and she reads a ton and she's always learning, and she doesn't have very much ego around her coaching, which is amazing. So, you know, if I have feelings one way or another, I can share them with her, and we have a very open relationship where I'll give her feedback and she'll take it, and you know, she'll give me feedback and I'll take it, and we're just as comfortable telling each other to you know, kick rocks. So like she'll call me out when I'm just being like a little bitch about something, but and like I'll call her out where I'm like, this is entirely unreasonable, and like I'll do some of a training and be like, this was over programmed, this was whatever, because it's challenging sometimes, I think too, coming from the female side, that sometimes she looks at things differently than the men do, or her scaling is sometimes a little bit wacky. So there are times where I get like absolutely roasted on something, and like the goal of what it was is not what it ends up being. So if I can identify those early, I'll just ask her, be like, well, what's the goal of this? And if it doesn't look like it's going to be that based on what's on paper, we'll adapt it. And she's got no problem with that. She's like, you know, this is what I want. I want the stimulus to be this. If that's not what it is, we got to change it. So having that sort of open dialogue is great. But I think that she's got very little ego, and her willingness to learn and adapt and just figure out what each of our athletes needs is super valuable. But it's been great. I think we've had a great relationship. I couldn't imagine working with anybody else. And so it's cool. I think that our personalities are very similar, and we get each other, and it's good. There's a lot of venting back and forth that goes on.
Final question. A year ago, we did have some structure to the season. I mean, we thought we knew what was going to happen, but there was still a general feeling of we maybe don't know what the future of CrossFit is going to be as far as the sport is concerned. How do you feel now about where the sport is and what the future of it is looking like under the new direction and the new leadership?
I think like very optimistic. Do I think that, you know, the current structure is the path forward? Like, no, I don't think that you can look at any competition structure in its infancy and say like, oh yeah, this is it. Like, this is going to take us to the promised land. But I do think that the direction of the company and the leadership, the way things are trending, will get us there. So I think that, you know, the openness of conversation, like the back and forth, the feedback, the data collecting that's going on, is going to get us there. Like, of course, we're still in a weird moment with, you know, certain closures. We're going to probably see a heavy emphasis on, you know, online competitions and developing technologies that support that. And those things will be super valuable even in the future when we can have live competition, because some areas of the world just don't have the ability to support lots of live competition. So having a really robust online structure is great. So I think we have, you know, some leadership there now that appreciates that sort of stuff and wants to build in the right areas to help continue to grow the community. And the sporting side will take shape, you know, like we're working on it. We're working with them as athletes. Like the games team is working with a lot of people and the events organizers and athletes and everyone to try to make this into the best version of what it can be. But, you know, CrossFit is still very young, right? And we're still trying to figure out a lot of things. And I in no way imagine that this is, you know, the final iteration of what it's going to be. And I think you can't think that way, but we're trying to make sure that every step we take is towards the direction that we want it to finally be, right? I don't think we want to keep whipping back and forth between like, you know, okay, we've got this free market sanctional system and now we're going to go back to regionals and we're going to do this and that. And I think that we're trying to figure out where the finish line is. And then even during the sort of weirdness that we're trying to navigate now, at the very least, continue to take small steps in that direction, and then we'll get there. But I think it's really promising. You know, I've had a lot of conversations and been privy to some cool information about the direction and what's going on. And I think it's super reassuring. And I have a lot of hope for where CrossFit can end up. And, I'm hopeful I'll still be competing when things take their final form, but if not, I hope that the work that we do, even in the PFA and the work that the games team does in the next few years, will leave a really cool future for all the athletes who are starting now. Right. Like I've lived through a lot of iterations of the system. I kind of came in the competition scene while things were very volatile, but people who are just coming up now and never did the sanctional system even, but for sure never did the regional system. Hopefully we can leave them with something really coherent and really fun and really cool that, has a lot of longevity to it.
Well, I know I speak for us and I speak for a lot of fans. We as well are hoping that you are still competing when, this thing is going full speed. That would be great for all of us. Best of luck this year, man. And always appreciate you stopping by.
Thanks a lot for having me. Thanks so much.